He had not expected the village to look smaller. Waya stood on the ridge above it, wind pressing against his face, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke and sage. Seasons had passed since his last step on this soil, yet every shape, the mountains, the river's bend, even the distant cry of hawks, felt unchanged. Only the silence in his chest was new, the kind that came after too many battles, too many names whispered into the ground. He started down the path, moccasins sinking into the damp earth. The woven blanket across his shoulder was torn at one corner, the copper armband dull with dust. His tomahawk felt heavier than before, or maybe he did. The village stirred as he reached the edge. Children stopped chasing each other. Dogs lifted their heads. A few older men turned, the lines in their faces deepening as recognition settled. One of them, a hunter named Kalo, stepped forward first. "You live," Kalo said simply. "For now," Waya answered. There was no laughter, no loud welcome, just nods, heavy, quiet acknowledgments. In their silence lived pride and grief both. The men who had gone with Waya had not all returned. Kalo gestured toward the largest lodge, the chief's. "They wait for you there." Waya's jaw tightened. He knew who they meant. The council, the elders, the ones who would want to know if the war had been worth what it took. But before he could answer, he saw her. Atsa walked between the lodges, carrying a bundle of dried herbs. Her braid fell down her back like a single dark line, swaying with her steps. For a moment, the noise around him dulled, the crackling fires, the rustle of fabric, even Kalo's voice. She had been younger when he left, barely a woman. Now she moved differently. There was patience in her steps, steadiness in her gaze, the kind of peace only time could carve into someone. But what caught him wasn't her calm. It was the necklace around her neck, simple, made from bone beads and a small carved token. It wasn't hers. He knew that token. It had belonged to Tannen, his closest friend. The one who hadn't come home. Waya's chest grew tight, and for the first time since he crossed the ridge, his heart stumbled. Atsa looked up then. Her eyes met his, and for a brief second the air between them shifted. Not recognition, more like disbelief. Then her jaw set, and she turned away, walking past him as though he were another ghost from the mountains. Kalo watched quietly. "She thought you died," he said after a pause. Waya didn't answer. He walked past the fires toward the river. The water was low this season, clear enough to see the stones at the bottom. He knelt and let it run through his fingers. He had fought for this land, for these people. Yet somehow everything felt foreign. Even the river seemed to hesitate before touching him. Behind him, a voice broke the silence. "You shouldn't have come back." He turned. Atsa stood a few paces away, the herbs still in her hands. Her tone wasn't cruel, it was wary, like she didn't trust what his presence would stir. "I belong here," he said quietly. "Belonging isn't the same as being welcome." Her fingers brushed the necklace absent-mindedly, and his gaze followed. "Where did you get that?" His voice was low. She hesitated. "It was given to me. Tannen?" Her lips parted slightly at the name. "He wanted me to keep it. Before he left with you." The air between them felt too heavy for the open space. Waya stood, his height casting a shadow across her face. "He was my brother in all but blood. He died beside me. I know." Her words were soft, but they struck harder than anger. "Then why wear his token?" "Because it's all that's left of him," she said, voice steady now. "You brought back his story. I carry what remains." For a long time, neither spoke. The river's sound filled the space, distant and steady. Finally, Waya nodded once. "Then keep it." He turned away before she could answer. The path back to his old lodge was lined with tall grass that brushed against his legs. Each step made the ache in his chest worse, but he didn't look back. Not yet. The next morning came with the cry of ravens and the faint scent of rain. Waya had barely slept. His lodge felt smaller than he remembered. Its walls, its air, even the ground under his blanket seemed to reject rest. He had spent years learning to survive without peace, and now that peace surrounded him, it felt foreign. Outside, the camp stirred to life. Women tended to fires, men sharpened tools, and children laughed between the lodges. Life had gone on without him. That was the hardest truth to face. He stepped outside, the woven blanket still around his shoulders, and found the chief waiting. The old man's hair was streaked with gray, his eyes dim but still sharp. "You returned with fewer men," the chief said, not unkindly. "I returned with the ones who could still walk." The answer hung in the air like smoke. The chief nodded slowly, as though expecting nothing else. "War leaves its scars, Waya. Not all are on the skin." "I didn't come to be comforted." "No," the chief said. "You came because you don't know where else to go." The words stung because they were true. The council spoke of rebuilding, of new threats along the border, of trade routes. Waya listened, but his eyes drifted to the far edge of the camp, where Atsa knelt by a pot, grinding herbs with rhythmic patience. He caught himself staring too long. When the meeting ended, he stayed behind, silent until the others drifted away. Only the chief remained. "She took in Tannen's mother after you left," the old man said quietly. "Helped her through the cold months. Helped bury her too." Waya's hand froze around the tomahawk handle. He hadn't known she was gone. "She carries more than her own grief," the chief continued. "You'd do well to remember that before judging what she wears around her neck." Waya said nothing. He left without a word. Later that day, thunder rolled faintly beyond the mountains. The air turned heavy, pressing close like a warning. Waya wandered toward the edge of the woods, needing space to breathe. The rain came suddenly, thin at first, then harder, until the ground turned dark with it. Through the curtain of rain, he saw her again. Atsa was collecting herbs before they spoiled, her dress clinging to her legs as she bent near a patch of wild sage. Without thinking, he walked toward her, the wet earth muffling his steps. "You'll catch sickness," he said. She didn't look up. "You think the rain cares who it touches?" He almost smiled. "You still argue like you used to." "I still don't like being told what to do." She straightened, the pendant around her neck glinting in the dim light. Water ran down her braid, dripping onto the muslin fabric that had turned nearly transparent in places. He forced himself to look away, though the image burned in his mind. "You shouldn't have gone to war," she said suddenly. Her voice wasn't angry. It trembled, like something long held back. "I went because I had to." "No," she said softly. "You went because you couldn't stand being here." The words struck deeper than any blade. He had no defense. She knew him too well. "I lost brothers there," he said after a long pause, "including the one who meant most to me." "I lost him too," she whispered. When she turned to leave, he caught her wrist. Not rough, but enough to make her stop. Her skin was cold from the rain. For a moment, neither moved. The sound of thunder swallowed their silence. "Let go," she said quietly. He did, and watched as she walked away, the storm swallowing her figure bit by bit, until she was only a shadow among the trees. That night, the rain eased. Fires flickered weakly around the camp. Waya sat near his lodge, carving the handle of his tomahawk with a small blade. The pattern was old, one he and Tannen had carved together years ago. His hands moved automatically, though his mind was elsewhere. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Atsa's face in the rain, the way her voice cracked when she spoke of Tannen, the way her hand had felt, warm despite the cold. He told himself it was nothing. He told himself it was only memory. But the truth was harder to ignore. Something in him had begun to wake again. Something he thought the war had buried. Days passed with quiet strain. The village moved like it always had. Women tending fires, children running with laughter that felt too innocent for a place built on so much loss. Yet for Waya, every dawn carried a weight heavier than the last. He had fought men who never saw his face. But this, returning home, facing the people who lived with the consequences, that was the harder war. He avoided Atsa when he could, but the camp was too small for avoidance to last. She always seemed to be near, walking toward the river with her bundle of herbs, standing outside the healer's tent, or kneeling beside someone's wounded arm, her voice low and calm. People trusted her. They looked at her the way soldiers once looked at him, with faith. It made something in him ache. That evening, the village gathered for a ceremony to honor the dead who had not returned. Fires ringed the open clearing. Each flame marked a name. When Waya's turn came to speak Tannen's, he stepped forward, voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. "He died standing," Waya said. "He smiled at me when the arrows came, told me to tell our people. He didn't run." The wind shifted, carrying sparks upward like spirits returning to the sky. Atsa stood nearby, her face unreadable in the light. When the ceremony ended, she didn't join the others who went to share food. Instead, she walked toward the river again. Waya followed, not because he wanted to, but because something inside him demanded he did. She stood at the edge of the water, her reflection trembling with the current. "I didn't ask you to come," she said without turning. "You didn't have to." Silence. "Only the soft lap of water and the crackle of distant fire," I told him, she said finally. Before he left, I told Tannen I'd wait for him. Her voice was small, almost a whisper. "He said he didn't want that. Said he didn't want me bound to a promise he might not return from." Waya's jaw tensed. That sounds like him. She turned to face him then, the moonlight catching her braid, her dress damp at the hem. "I wanted to believe he'd live," she said. "Every night I prayed. And then when you came back without him, I didn't know what to feel. Anger, maybe. Relief that you made it. Shame for feeling relief." Her words cut deeper than accusation ever could. "I would have traded my life for his," Waya said. "I know." Her tone softened. "That's what makes it worse." He looked away, the river reflecting the pale shimmer of stars. "What do you want from me, Atsa?" he asked quietly. "Nothing." Then after a pause, "But you should know. Wearing this necklace doesn't mean I belong to the past. It means I remember it. I never asked you to forget." "Good," she said, "because I couldn't, even if I tried." They stood there for a while. No words, no movement. Just the current passing between them, steady and relentless. When she left, he stayed. Watching the river twist around the stones, he thought about the years lost to war, about what it had cost them both. He wondered if peace could ever belong to men who had forgotten how to live without the sound of battle in their heads. The next morning, he woke early. He gathered tools, repaired a broken fence near the horse corral, and offered to hunt with the younger men. The work steadied him. The ache dulled into something quieter. But when he returned at dusk, he found Atsa by his lodge. She stood straight, her hands clasped, eyes fixed on him. "I need your help," she said. "With what?" "There's a boy near the ridge. Fever. His mother sent for the healer, but she's with the chief. I can't carry him alone." He didn't hesitate. "Lead the way." The trail wound through trees and stones slick with old rain. When they reached the boy's lodge, the mother was outside, worry written all over her face. Inside, the child burned with heat, his skin pale, lips cracked. Atsa knelt beside him, mixing herbs with water, whispering words that sounded half like prayer, half like memory. Waya stayed by the door, but she turned to him once. "Hold him still," she said. "He needs to drink." He obeyed without question. When the boy began to shiver, Atsa pressed a damp cloth to his chest, her brow furrowed, her hands sure. Hours passed. The storm outside deepened, lightning flashing through the cracks in the walls. When the boy finally stilled, his breathing even again, Atsa sat back with a trembling sigh. Waya watched her in the flickering firelight, the fatigue on her face, the small tremor in her fingers. "You haven't slept either," he said. She shook her head. "Sleep feels like something I have to earn." He wanted to say something, to tell her she already had, but the words caught behind his teeth. Instead, he reached out and adjusted the blanket around the boy's shoulders. When he looked back up, she was watching him. Not kindly, not with affection, but with something quieter. Understanding, maybe. Outside, thunder rolled again, low and distant. Neither of them spoke as they stepped out into the cool night. The air smelled like rain and smoke. She started walking back toward the village. He followed, a few steps behind, as the first drops began to fall once more. Neither reached for cover. It was the kind of silence that said more than words ever could. By the next sunrise, word spread through the camp that the sick boy would live. Mothers passed the news in hushed tones, relief warming their voices. Atsa's name carried through the whispers, not with praise, but with quiet gratitude, the kind that stayed longer than words. Waya stayed silent through it all, but something in him softened. For years, he'd been the hand that destroyed. She somehow had become the hand that healed. That morning, he saw her outside her lodge, hanging herbs to dry. The early light caught the fine threads of her braid, the faint movement of her shoulders as she worked. He thought about walking away, but his feet betrayed him again. "You did good work," he said, his voice low. Atsa didn't turn. "It wasn't only me." "Still," he said, "he wouldn't be breathing without you." She paused, not from pride, but as if unsure what to do with kindness from him. After a moment, she said, "You've changed. So have you. Maybe. Or maybe you just never looked close enough before." That silenced him. Later that day, the hunters returned, carrying less than expected. The storm had scared the herds deeper into the hills. Supplies would run short before the next moon. Waya volunteered to lead a small group to track them north. The chief agreed, but warned that the mountain trails were still slick with rain. Atsa approached as the men prepared to leave. "The path north crosses the river," she said. "Take care. It swells fast this season." He nodded. "You sound like someone who's crossed it too many times." "I have. It doesn't forgive the careless." Her gaze lingered longer than usual. Then she added, "If you're wise, you'll come back before the next storm." He almost smiled. "I'll try not to make you worry." Her lips curved slightly, almost a smile, almost not. Then she turned and walked away, the small pendant swinging with her steps. The hunt lasted 3 days. The air grew colder the higher they climbed. When they finally returned, their hands raw and boots heavy with mud, the camp lights were already dim. Most had gone to sleep. Waya dropped the meat at the storage tent and made his way to the river to wash off the trail dust. The moonlight rippled faintly across the water, a mirror he didn't want to look into. A sound came from behind him. Footsteps, light and careful. He turned to see Atsa carrying a woven basket. "You should rest," she said. "You look half dead." "Then you shouldn't sneak up on the half-dead," he answered dryly. She came closer, kneeling to fill the basket with water. "I wasn't sneaking. You were just too tired to notice." He studied her for a moment. The calm way she moved, the quiet rhythm of her breathing. "I used to think silence meant peace," he said finally. "After the war, it just feels empty." Atsa glanced up at him, then back at the water. "Silence isn't empty. It just waits for something worth breaking it." He didn't know what to say to that. When she stood, their arms brushed, not much, barely a touch, but enough to make both of them go still. The air changed. The night around them seemed to hold its breath. Her eyes lifted, meeting his. There was no warmth there yet, only the ghost of something trying to be. Then she stepped back. "Good night, Waya." He watched her walk away until the sound of her footsteps faded into the trees. For a long time, he stayed by the river, his reflection caught between moonlight and shadow, like a man who'd been gone too long to know what home should feel like anymore. That night, the storm returned. The wind tore through the valley, pushing against the lodges and scattering ash from old fires. Waya sat awake, listening to it. The tomahawk rested beside him, a habit he couldn't break. Every roll of thunder felt like battle echoing from far away. He thought about Atsa's words, her calm, her patience. How she had survived her own war without ever lifting a weapon. How she could stand in the rain and not shatter. And for the first time since returning home, Waya realized something simple. He didn't feel alone anymore. The first chill of autumn whispered through the valley. The air carried the scent of pine and smoke, and every night the firelight drew long shadows across the camp. Waya had spent the day alone in the high ridges, chasing thoughts he didn't want and memories he couldn't bury. When he returned at dusk, the camp was quiet except for the crackle of flames and the distant hum of a drum. His sister handed him a piece of roasted corn, but he barely tasted it. His eyes found Atsa across the fire, sitting with 2 other women, her head bowed as she threaded beads. The faint glint around her neck caught his attention again. The same necklace. His friend's necklace. Waya stared for too long. The sound of the fire faded. Every muscle in his body tightened with something sharp and ugly that he didn't know how to name. He rose and walked toward her. The other women quieted as he stopped before them, his shadow stretching across the firelight. "Atsa," he said, voice low. She looked up slowly. The glow of the flames touched her face, calm, unreadable, as if she knew what he was going to ask. "Where did you get that necklace?" The other women shifted uneasily and took that as their sign to leave. Only the 2 of them remained by the fire. The crackling filled the silence between them. "It was given to me," she said finally. "By who?" Her fingers brushed the pendant. "You know who." He felt the heat rise in his chest. "My friend is dead." Her eyes flickered, pain or guilt or both. "Yes." "Then why wear it?" Atsa looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "Because it was meant to be a promise." The words hit him harder than he expected. He stood still, heart pounding in his ears. "A promise?" he repeated. "Yes," she said softly. "He said if he did not return, I should keep it, to remember him." Waya clenched his jaw. "You were promised to him?" For a moment, she didn't speak. The fire crackled. Then, quietly, before the war, before everything. He stepped back, unable to look at her. The world felt smaller, tighter. The anger he'd been holding for weeks finally had somewhere to go, but it mixed with something else he didn't want to name. "You should have told me," he said through his teeth. "And what would that change?" she asked, eyes still on the fire. "You came back from war with ghosts. You looked at me as if I was one of them." He didn't answer. Couldn't. The silence that followed was heavy. 2 lives crossing at the wrong time, under the wrong stars. Then she said quietly, "You don't know what it was like when you didn't return. How many nights I waited. How I buried that necklace once. Dug it up again when he didn't come back either." The firelight trembled across her face. Her voice didn't shake, but her hands did. Waya's anger faltered. He took a slow breath. "I didn't know," he said. "No," she whispered. "You didn't." He turned away, his hands tightening at his sides. He wanted to leave, to walk into the night and forget her voice, her words. But he couldn't move. He stood there, until the fire burned low, until the night grew cold, until neither of them had anything left to say. The days after the argument passed in silence. The kind that settles heavy in the chest, that turns every glance into something sharp. Waya no longer sat near the central fire. He took his meals on the far side of camp, or sometimes didn't eat at all. Atsa noticed, though she pretended she didn't. She told herself it didn't matter, that she had no reason to think of him anymore, that the man who had once fought beside her brother was not her concern. But she still heard his footsteps at night, the slow, restless pacing near the river where he used to sit with his friend. It was late afternoon when the elders called for everyone to help prepare for the autumn gathering. The hunters would bring meat from the mountains, and the women would prepare food, cloth, and paint. Atsa was chosen to help dye fabric and gather certain herbs for the ceremony. She accepted quietly. When she went to collect the herbs at the foot of the ridges, she saw him again. Waya. He was tightening the straps on his horse, ready to leave camp. Their eyes met for the first time in days. Neither spoke. "The elders said you'd help with the dyeing," she said finally. "I was told to bring cedar from the North Trail," he replied without looking at her. They both knew that trail. It cut through a narrow pass where wolves hunted. The last storm had washed half the path away. "You shouldn't go alone," she said before she could stop herself. He gave a bitter smile. "You care now?" Her throat tightened. She wanted to tell him to forget it, but something heavier pushed her words out. "I care if someone dies on a path that isn't safe. That's all." He didn't answer, just mounted his horse and rode off into the trees. Atsa cursed under her breath and turned back toward the ridge. But the more she thought about it, the more unease grew in her chest. By sunset, she was already walking after him, basket of herbs forgotten. The forest was quiet. The orange light of dusk filtered through the pines, and every sound seemed too loud, the crackle of twigs, the sigh of wind. She followed the faint prints of his horse along the path until she reached a slope where the trail had broken away. And then she saw it. His horse, tethered to a low branch, pawing nervously at the ground. "Waya?" No answer. She followed, the sound of movement downhill, and found him crouched beside a fallen tree, one leg bleeding where he'd slipped against a rock. His jaw was tight, but he didn't look surprised to see her. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "You shouldn't have gone alone," she shot back, kneeling beside him. He tried to move his leg but winced. "It's nothing." "Hold still." She tore a strip from her shawl and pressed it to the cut. He tensed, but didn't push her away. The silence stretched again, heavy but different now. Not angry, just thick with everything they hadn't said. "Why did you follow me?" he asked finally. She didn't meet his eyes. "Because I thought you might need help." "I don't," he said quietly. "I didn't ask what you wanted," she replied. He exhaled through his nose, half a laugh, half frustration. "You haven't changed. Neither have you," she said softly. Still stubborn. Still too proud to say thank you. His eyes flicked up to her then. The first real look in days. For a heartbeat, she saw the man he used to be before the war, before the loss. "You think I'm proud?" he asked. "I know you are," she said. "But I also know why." "Why?" "Because you survived when he didn't." That broke something in the air between them. The fire in her voice died, replaced by quiet truth. He looked away. "You think that's something to be proud of?" "No," she said softly. "But it's something you carry. Like I carry this necklace." She touched the pendant lightly. It glimmered in the fading light, small and dull, but heavy with memory. He swallowed hard, the sound rough. "Every time I see it, I remember his voice, the way he laughed, the way he stopped. He saved me once. That's why I came back." She looked at him for a long moment. "He saved both of us then." The wind picked up. She tightened the bandage and stood. "You can walk?" He tested his weight. "Barely." "Then I'll help. I don't need... Waya." The tone in her voice stopped him. Not angry, not soft, just certain. He nodded once, grudgingly, and leaned against her as they made their way back toward the horse. The closeness was uncomfortable at first, his arm heavy across her shoulders, her hand gripping his waist to steady him. But as they moved, the distance that had felt impossible days ago seemed to blur. They didn't speak again until they reached the clearing where the trees opened to the last glow of sunset. The light touched his face, soft and golden. She could see the faint scar that ran along his jaw, the one she'd never noticed before. "Thank you," he said finally, almost under his breath. She smiled faintly. "You said it." He looked at her, really looked, and something shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the first crack in the wall between them. They stood there for a long time as the sun sank behind the hills, two shadows caught between what was lost and what could never be spoken. The next morning, the camp woke under a low gray sky, the kind that pressed down on the mountains, heavy and waiting. Waya's legs still hurt, but he refused to rest. He spent the morning sharpening blades, checking arrows, pretending not to limp. Every time Atsa passed by, he looked away. The air between them was softer since that night. Less anger, more quiet acceptance. But it still hurt to stand near her. She no longer avoided him either. She brought him herbs without asking, tied his bandage tighter when it loosened, and spoke to him the way she used to. Calm, steady, with that trace of defiance that always cut through his silence. But the storm they'd buried between them was not gone. It waited. By afternoon, the wind picked up, bending the trees, scattering ash from the fire pits. Atsa was outside her tent, gathering the last of the dyed cloth before the rain, when she heard shouting from the ridge. Raiders. The word ran through camp like lightning. Children were rushed into shelters. The elders grabbed what weapons they could. Waya limped toward the horses, grabbing his tomahawk and bow. He looked toward the northern ridge, where the smoke was already rising. Atsa followed him, heart pounding. "You can't fight like this," she said. He didn't even slow down. "I won't sit while they burn our homes. You'll die. Then I die standing." The wind tore through the camp, carrying the smell of smoke and fear. Atsa felt something sharp twist inside her. She caught his arm before he mounted the horse. "You think dying will pay for what you carry? For his death? For mine?" He froze. Her voice was trembling now, not from fear, but anger, the kind that only comes from love buried too long. "You think it would make him proud," she said. "But he didn't save you so you'd throw yourself away." For a heartbeat, he looked at her, really looked, the storm clouds reflected in his eyes. Then without a word, he grabbed her hand, squeezed it once, and rode off toward the ridge. The sky opened. Rain fell in sheets. Atsa ran after him through the mud, barefoot, the pendant slapping against her chest. By the time she reached the ridge, the sound of shouting had already faded into thunder. She found him there, not dead, but standing alone amid the chaos, breathing hard, his tomahawk slick with rain. The raiders had fled, leaving only smoke and silence behind. He turned when he heard her footsteps. His hair was plastered to his face, water running down his jaw. "You shouldn't have come," he said quietly. "You knew I would," she answered. They stood there in the rain, too exhausted to argue, too relieved to speak. Then she stepped forward, close enough that the heat of his breath mingled with hers despite the cold. "You always leave," she whispered. "Even when you're here." He didn't answer at first. His hand trembled where it hung at his side. Then, slowly, he reached up and touched the pendant at her throat. "I never wanted to take what wasn't mine," he said. She shook her head. "You already did." Their eyes locked. The rain between them felt alive, pulsing, heavy, blurring the line between grief and something deeper. When he leaned in, it wasn't soft. It was desperate, raw, the kind of kiss that burns through years of silence and guilt and things left unsaid. For a heartbeat, the world around them disappeared. No war, no ghosts, no friend's memory hanging between them. Just two souls who had waited too long. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Neither spoke. There was nothing left to say. He pressed his forehead against hers and whispered, "I have to go." She didn't ask where. She already knew. He left before the storm ended. By dawn, the sky cleared, and Atsa stood by the river with his copper armband in her hand, the only thing he'd left behind. The necklace still hung at her neck, but its weight felt different now. Not a promise, not a memory, a wound that would heal, slowly, in its own time. And when the wind carried the faint echo of hoofbeats from far beyond the hills, she didn't turn. She simply closed her eyes and let the sound fade into the mountains.